Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're looking into something a little different, Islamic rulings on hunting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we found this source in Farsi. It looks like maybe a book or a pamphlet called Akami Shikar.
You okay?
And we've got the table of contents and even a website, www.akode.com. Could be the publisher or a related organization. But, you might think hunting, is it really that complicated? But there's actually a lot to uncover here.
Yeah, you know that word akam right away that suggests a whole system of rules and regulations. So this is serious stuff, clearly a structured approach within Islamic thought.
Exactly. So let's jump into this table of contents. It's pretty detailed. We've got sections on the definition of hunting, rulings on hunting different animals, permissible and prohibited methods, ethical considerations, even Islamic teachings and stories related to hunting.
It's really comprehensive, isn't it? Not just a list of do's and don'ts, but looking at this topic from all sides. Practical, ethical, and even spiritual.
I know that's what's so interesting to me. We think of hunting in a very practical way, but there are obviously deeper layers here. Let's start with the basics. What does the intro of the book tell us about the Islamic perspective on hunting as a whole?
Well, it lays out a really interesting foundation, recognizing hunting as a legitimate activity for both food and sport, but a big emphasis on responsible and ethical conduct. It's not about dominating nature, but more about acting as stewards and respecting the balance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes sense given how much Islam emphasizes stewardship.
Right.
But how does that actually work in practice? What specific animals are mentioned in the table of contents, and how do they classify them as okay to hunt or not?
So they go into specifics about gazelles, birds, even fish.
Wow.
There's even a section on locusts.
Really?
Which is surprising at first, but it shows how the context really matters for these rulings. And it's not just broad categories like can you hunt birds, it gets into the specifics of which types of birds and the reasons for those distinctions.
Okay, so there's a lot more nuance than I expected. It's not just black and white, but shades of gray. So if we're talking about specific animals and situations, I have to ask about hunting methods. Does the book get into how a hunt should actually be carried out?
Absolutely. It goes into great detail about allowed and forbidden methods. And what really stands out is minimizing suffering. It's not enough to just kill the animal. The method has to ensure a quick and humane death.
So, what are some examples of methods that would be forbidden? That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. The book specifically says you can't use things that cause unnecessary pain or make the animal suffer for a long time, like poisoned arrows or certain types of traps. It really highlights the importance of treating the animal with respect even when taking its life.
That brings up so many interesting questions about how we see our relationship with animals. But before we go there, I want to touch on something else I saw on the table of contents. The spiritual dimension of hunting. Now, this is where things could get really fascinating.
You got it. It's not just a dry legal document.
Yeah.
This book goes beyond the practical stuff and explores the spiritual side of hunting in Islam. And that's what we'll be looking at next.
Yeah, it's amazing how this book connects the actual act of hunting with the deeper spiritual side. It's not just about food or sport. It's about recognizing that life is sacred and approaching the act with reverence.
So what kind of guidelines or practices show this spiritual aspect? What makes Islamic hunting unique in that way?
Well, one thing that stands out is that you're supposed to say specific prayers before and after you hunt, like acknowledging a higher power and recognizing that all beings are connected.
Right, it's like a ritual.
Yeah.
A way to make it more than just a necessity and give it meaning.
Exactly. And there are guidelines for being thankful for the animal's life and recognizing that it's giving you sustenance. It's about being humble and respectful, not like you're entitled to it.
I see how it all fits together now. The ethical methods, the careful choosing of animals, and now these spiritual practices, it's a holistic approach, recognizing that everything's connected. And it's reinforced by the stories and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad that are woven throughout the book. They give you real-life examples of how to actually live these principles.
Okay, I'm really interested now. Do you have a specific story that shows this spiritual side of hunting?
There's one that really captures the essence of it.
Yeah.
The Prophet Muhammad once ran into a guy who had killed a sheep without mentioning God's name first, and he gently corrected the guy, saying, "When one of you slaughters, let him mention Allah's name."
Wow, that's powerful. It's not just about the killing. It's about the hunter's mental and spiritual state, too. Like a reminder that even when you take a life, you should do it mindfully and with respect.
Exactly. A great example of how Islamic teachings bring deeper meaning to even simple actions.
So make me rethink my whole view of hunting. So we talked about the spiritual side, but this book also gets into practical stuff. What about handling the meat after you've killed the animal? Are there rules about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. The book gives specific instructions on how to spin the animal, how to drain its blood, even how to divide the meat among the people who are part of the hunt or those in need.
Sounds like there's a real focus on not wasting anything and making sure the animal's life is honored, even after death. It's not just about taking what you want, but using every part of the animal respectfully and responsibly.
You got it. It's about recognizing that the animal made a sacrifice and not letting anything go to waste. And that sense of responsibility goes beyond the individual hunter to the community as a whole. The book really emphasizes sharing what you've hunted with those less fortunate.
That's a beautiful link to the Islamic principles of charity and social responsibility. It's fascinating how this seemingly simple act of hunting connects to so many other aspects of Islamic life and teachings. It's like even when you're getting food, there's a chance to live by your values and help others.
Exactly. And this is where you see the real depth of this book. It's not just rules. It's a window into a way of thinking that stresses respect for creation, ethical behavior, and a sense of being connected to everything.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We found out so much more than I expected. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about the specific rulings on different types of animals. I know the book goes into detail about what's allowed and what's forbidden.
Yeah, there's a lot more to discover. And that's where we'll pick up in our last segment. We'll explore the world of how Islam classifies animals and the reasons behind it.
Okay, so we're back and ready to get into the details about which animals are considered okay or not okay to hunt in Islam. I'm really interested to see how these categories reflect those values and ideas we've been talking about.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting how this book, Ahkam Shikar, approaches it. It doesn't just say yes or no. It explains the reasoning behind each classification. Like, it wants you to understand where each animal fits in the natural order and how our actions can mess that up.
So give me some examples. What creatures are specifically mentioned? And why are they categorized the way they are?
Well, like we touched on before, gazelles are often mentioned as being okay to hunt. They were a common food source where Islam began, and their numbers could handle responsible hunting.
So it's not just about the animal itself, but about its place in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And whether hunting would throw things off balance.
Exactly. And that same thinking applies to certain birds being okay to hunt, like partridges and pigeons. They're mentioned in the book. They're usually plentiful, and eating them wouldn't threaten their populations.
It's all making a lot more sense now. It's about understanding how everything in the ecosystem is connected and making sure what we do doesn't have unintended consequences.
Right. And this leads us to the interesting topic of forbidden animals, those called haram. A lot of times these rules are based on ideas of purity, respect for certain creatures, or protecting vulnerable species.
Okay, so give us some examples. What kind of animals are in this category, and why are they off limits?
One of the most famous examples is the pig. Eating pork is considered unclean in Islam, and that extends to hunting them too. It's about following a specific dietary code that's really important in Islamic tradition.
So it's not just the animal's ecological role, but also what it symbolizes in the faith.
Exactly. And another interesting group of prohibited animals is carnivores, like wolves and lions. You'd think predators would be fair game for hunters, but Islamic law sees it differently.
Now that is surprising. What's the reason for that rule?
Well, it's not about humans being at the top of the food chain. It's about understanding where each creature belongs in the natural order. Hunting certain animals, especially ones that are already in danger or important for keeping the ecosystem balanced, would be messing with that order.
So even in hunting, there's a sense of humility. Recognizing that we're not the only ones who matter on this planet, it's about respecting this intricate web of life.
Right. And that brings us back to the main point of Ahkam Shikar, that hunting in Islam isn't just about taking a life, it's about knowing our place in nature and acting responsibly.
This deep dive has been incredible. We started with a simple book title and ended up exploring a whole philosophy of ethical hunting. It's not just what you hunt, but how you hunt, why you hunt, even what you do with the meat afterwards. It's about matching your actions with your beliefs and seeing the deeper meaning even in everyday things.
Yeah, it's been great exploring this with you. And I hope our listeners have a better understanding now of how deep and complex Islamic thought is on this topic that often gets overlooked.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you all with something to think about.
Yeah.
Given this rich tradition of ethical hunting in Islam, are there lessons here for other cultures and traditions? As we face the environmental and ethical problems of modern hunting practices, it's something to ponder as we keep trying to understand our relationship with the natural world. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.